Welcome to this video. Today I'm going to be talking about something pretty important. The history of education. I will be discussing today part 1 of a 4-part documentary on the history of education in the 13 colonies in the United States. Part 1 details the era from 1770 to 1890 and is called The Common School. The documentary starts to highlight the idea that school nowadays is so commonplace that you would think that it was written into the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence that everyone would have the right to a public education. But that's not the case. In 1770, if you were to go to school, it was likely because the people in your town pooled resources together to hire a teacher. And as far as education goes, most people were only educated enough to read the Bible, pay their taxes, and essentially take the place of their parents. However, after the Revolutionary War and the colonies gained independence from Great Britain, there was a shift. A lot of people believed that a public education would be a way to build a country. You might not be familiar with the name Noah Webster, but if I said there was a very popular book, Webster's... Exactly. This guy, Noah Webster, published a book called The Blueback Speller. It promoted a new national language with many different spellings from Great Britain. I've always kind of wondered about that, and where that all started from. And it was the precursor to that book we all know today, Webster's Dictionary. There were also leaders at the time, like Thomas Jefferson, who thought that educating the public was the only way to maintain a democracy. Because in a democracy, you vote to choose your leader, so people need to be educated enough to know about the people they're voting for and what the democracy is. Jefferson had an excellent education growing up, and the idea was that this education would be there for everyone. Well, not everyone. Educating the public really served two purposes. There was in order to maintain the democracy, but also to figure out who the best and the brightest were, who would eventually go on to college and lead the country. At the time, Jefferson's views were considered pretty radical. People didn't want to be taxed for others' education, and the idea that educating the public is a common good was not yet seen. And really, that's what part 1 of this documentary really builds up. How we go from education as something you can pursue and pay for on your own to a public service. So Jefferson's ideas were shot down numerous times, and it didn't start to see fruition until 1830s, 1840s, through the work of Horace Mann as Secretary of Education. What Horace Mann did that people really admired is he went by horseback and visited all the area schools. And what he found was not good. He found that schools paid for by local taxes and fees from parents did not suffice for creating equal education amongst different towns. And he documented all this information, and I want to just read to you one part that was amusing from his experts that that video showed. The schoolhouse in District Number 3. How should we speak of that? Clear away the surrounding forest which protects it, and before the next gale is over, the foundation stone would be all that remained of it. Already aware of the danger, the mice have forsaken it. I mean, that just sounds terrible. We don't have schools or, things like that today, do we? But really, he found that public schools seemed to be falling apart, and a lot of people were turning to private schools, and that the government had to step in to do something. And so he held public meetings, and he started to promote the common school. The common school would teach a common body of knowledge, and it had a lot of the things that we think of when we think of schools today, the chairs, the desks, equal across schools, so that everyone had an equal chance at education. He really believed that no matter if you were elite, you were poor, education could be the great equalizer. So obviously, these schools would be free of charge. No fees for parents. A lot of people still pushed back that a state tax for schooling is not right. That should be left up to the people who are attending that school to pay for. People still today I mean, still hold some of those views. A personal anecdote, my school district that I attended high school at is currently in statutory operating debt. And they're holding a referendum on August 11th to get a levy to increase funding for each student. Now, there's a ton of opposition to that. People don't think that their tax dollars should go up, to pay for this school. It seems similar. But through all his debates, Horace Mann did accomplish quite a bit. Teacher regulation and teacher training, but also, most importantly, in all of the northern states, a free, tax-supported education. So, Horace Mann's idea of the common school is taking ground, and we're in the 1840s now, where conflict over religion in schools starts to take hold. New York City was seeing a wave of immigration come in, many of them Irish Catholics. And so, while the common school was free for all public education, it was very Protestant. The documentary talks about some of the textbooks and resources that schools would use being very anti-Catholic. The treatment of Catholics in the common school, which was primarily Protestant, was protested by John Hughes. He felt that students attending the common school was an indoctrination into the Protestant faith. So he said that Catholic students deserve their own school. They shouldn't have to go to school where they read a Protestant Bible. And so the documentary talks about the New York City school debates where they packed the galleries and debated this issue: should Catholics receive funding for their own schools? And there was a lot of arguing that, well, if we do that, then there'll be, an argument for all other sects to claim that they need funding for schools. One thing that was accomplished through this debate was that New York principals were required to go through by hand and remove any offensive material in textbooks or other resources that were offensive to Catholics. After this, many more Catholics started enrolling in the common school, as there might be some slight improvement to their treatment. A little while later, in the 1850s, after John Hughes received a bit more power being named Archbishop, he created a national Catholic school system, and it became the major alternative to the common school. Now, at the same time the debate over religion in school was going on, there was also the issue of race in school. In Boston in the 1840s, parents of children and reformers were talking about this issue of segregation in schools. And Frederick Douglass actually made the case that what they need to fight for is that children get to attend the closest school to where they live, no matter whether that's a white school or a black school. Note at the time in Boston there were only 2 black schools for black children to attend, no matter where they lived in the city. And so a petition was made and called for the desegregation of schools in Boston. They looked at the black schools and found that they were in dire need of repair. They were not equal to the other schools in Boston, white schools in Boston. Especially the Smith School, which 5-year-old Sarah Roberts attended, was in very bad shape. And so Sarah Roberts' father wanted to enroll his daughter in the closest school to his house. And Sarah was denied access to that school, so went to the second closest school to where she lived, denied. Third school closest to where she lived. Fourth school closest to where she lived. Fifth school, all before being able to attend the Smith School. So she passed 4 schools on her way to the Smith School. Now, Roberts wanted to sue over this, over the segregation of schools in Boston. And that wasn't met with unanimous support from African Americans. Many thought that what kind of education would they get from a white teacher, or this is only going to lead to competition to white students. How is this going to help us desegregating schools? But it was decided that a majority were in favor of desegregation, and so he took this case to the court. However, the judge ruled against Sarah, and segregation still persisted in Boston. A few years later, after that case, in 1855, the Massachusetts state legislature, though, made a law banning segregation in the state of Massachusetts. the first law of its kind in the entire nation. The last topic that the video, discusses is women teachers. And the historians in this video say that women teachers, the reason they were hired was they were cheap. If we're building all these schools, let's hire women teachers. They say that the offhand, they're also good with little kids was, barely mentioned. The video talks about Kathleen Breacher, who really promoted women teachers because it gave women a noble profession that was, of equal to the medics or the doctors or lawyers that men were. Women were good and could do this job, and it was, a good job for women. The video wraps up by letting you know that at this time, 1890, America is teaching more kids than any other country on earth. More kids have access to a public education.